All right, Mark, Yoni, Yair, thank you so much for being with us. Mark, let's start with you. 30 seconds on the clock. What should the Netanyahu government do next?
I think we should start by saying what needs to be said, and that is those 3 soldiers who were killed protecting Israel, protecting our borders, and protecting the people of Israel. On the way to the studio here tonight, I saw hundreds of people in the Jaffa area enjoying themselves. They can only do that because young men and women like those 3 give of their time and their energy and their talents, 3 years of their life to protect the people of Israel, and we should all take off our hats and pay respect to them and their colleagues.
Yoni, what should the Netanyahu government do next?
Well, there is terrorism on the border with Egypt, and there is terrorism in the West Bank. And what should be done is, first of all, finish quickly the investigation, the IDF investigation into the circumstances of what happened and why these 3 soldiers were killed and why it was not prevented. To strengthen the security cooperation with the Egyptians. And as for the West Bank, to have a big military operation in the north of the West Bank against the terror groups, the armed terror groups in the north of the West Bank.
And Yair, same question to you. What should the Netanyahu government do next?
Well, the policy should be improving the relationship between between Israel, Jordan, and Egypt. There is no other way. And I think this government, unfortunately, operate constantly in order to destroy the close relationship we have developed with Jordan and Egypt in so many years. So I would say, Mr. Netanyahu, please pay attention to the connection between the situation in the Palestinian arena and the relationship with Egypt and Jordan.
All right, we're going to open it up now. Mark, I want to start with you. Protests outside Netanyahu's home in Caesarea, 17 people arrested there. Police saying that it was an illegal protest, but these demonstrators are saying that they want their voices to be heard against this government. There's also a lot of videos of fights between police and these demonstrators. I mean, the videos are quite violent, and some are calling it police brutality. So are the police cracking down too hard on these demonstrations? This is not the first time we've seen them either.
Obviously, Israel is a democracy and people have the right to protest, but protests have to be done within the framework of the law. And if the police believe that protesters are interfering with the public safety, if the protesters don't have a permit, if they're protesting in a place that will affect the people living in the neighborhood in a negative way, the police have the right to ask them to move. And I think if they can use reasonable force if protesters don't agree to do so. I think, though, if we take a step back and look at the protest movement, their numbers are going down, and the sort of people going to Caesarea tend to be the hardcore activists, the sort of people who really aren't interested in judicial reform or finding a compromise. They just want to see the government fall. They're very upset that the Israeli people voted for this government on the 1st of November last year, and they want the government to fall, and they're continuing these sort of demonstrations. Their numbers are going down. Most of the public is in a different place. They want to see a compromise on judicial reform. They want to see the country move forward and not into polarization and internal disruption.
Yoni, Mark is noting that these demonstrators want the government to fall. Is that what they want? And if that is their motive, should police use that kind of force on them? What's your take?
Well, it's not new that they want the government to fall. This is their right to want different things, but this Netanyahu government has 64 seats in the Knesset, in the parliament, and it cannot be toppled by demonstrations. They need a majority in the Knesset to overthrow this government. So I think basically the small groups that are demonstrating are not affecting anything. And of course, it's their right to demonstrate, and we have to respect this. But police brutality is not something new in Israel. Sometimes it's directed against demonstrators from the right wing. Sometimes it's against the demonstrators from the left wing. This is something that has to be taken care of in the police itself. It doesn't is not connected to any political motives.
And Yair, your take, police brutality, is it going too far in these protests?
Well, I think that in this case it went too far, and in other cases it was reasonable and on the right measure. But I think that the real issue is not the police. The real issue is this illegitimate government who tries to do the same thing like Kaczynski did in Poland, Orban in Hungary, and Erdogan in Turkey. And we should pay attention to this phenomenon. This is the issue. This is the real issue. It's not just the judicial reform or what we call the legal uprising. It's about whether Israel will remain democracy for the next 50 years or not. And I think we see, very negative, very problematic phenomenon all over the world, and we should not follow the path of Hungary and Poland. And this is the most dangerous thing to the cohesiveness of the Israeli society.
Mark, I want to give you a chance to respond to that, because earlier you said the people elected this government on November 1st. Yair is saying that this is an illegitimate government. How do you respond to that?
Well, Yair's entitled to his opinion, of course, but it's a legal government that was elected. It has, as was said by Yoni, it has a majority in the Knesset, and it is ruling according to law. That some people don't like the government, that's their right. But I think it's important to understand the protest movement, which in the past had much larger numbers, their numbers have gone down. They still manage to get a few thousand people in the street. On Saturday nights, they can get tens of thousands, but their numbers are going down. And if you look at the protest movement, they're grabbing for other issues today. They talked about money going to the ultra-Orthodox. They've talked about army deferments. In other words, they're finding any issue they can to try to attack the government, which is, of course, their right. But the bottom line is this. The most important thing now is to try to find a consensus on the judicial reform, to try to find a compromise that can work. I don't know if it's possible. I hope it is. But the people out there protesting in Caesarea against the Prime Minister, they're not interested in a compromise. Most Israelis want a compromise. Most Israelis want us to get back to some sort of normal political situation, and that can only happen if we find some sort of compromise on judicial reform.
Well, look, Yoni, speaking of compromise, Simcha Rothman was quoted saying a couple days ago, quote, "I do not intend to waste my precious time on fruitless discussions. The talks at the president's residence are meaningless." So Mark is saying that the people want compromise, the protesters want compromise, but, one of the architects of these judicial reforms is saying that he doesn't want it and it's meaningless. So how do you respond to that?
First of all, the judicial reform, or some people call it in other names, is actually dead. There's no way to implement it. And I don't think that Netanyahu wants to implement it. I think he is very well aware of the fact that he will not be able to visit the White House with such a reform, if such a reform is passed in the Knesset, and he understands very well the ramification in the international community for such a reform. And as for Simcha Rothman, he doesn't decide anything. The only person who decides is the Prime Minister Netanyahu about the fate of this judicial reform. Therefore, there isn't any importance to Simcha Rothman and his statements.
And Yair, your take, Simcha Rothman saying that the discussions are fruitless. What do you make of that?
I think that the discussions are not so important. I think that, on the contrary, we need to go back to the basis. And the basis is that the corrupted prime minister is bad. Extreme nationalism with messianic approach, it's bad for the destiny of Israel. And in strengthening the autonomy of the ultra-Orthodox in Israel, it's bad for them and bad for the destiny of Israel. So what are we talking about? It's not just about the judicial reform. It's about the destiny of Israel. And we should say no to corruption. We should say no to messianic extremism. And we should say no to some sort of and strengthening the autonomy of ultra-Orthodox, including and in that, some sort of permission not to educate their young people in a correct manner.
Mark, I'm going to give you 30 seconds to respond to what we just heard here.
I'm also opposed to messianism. I'm opposed to extreme religious messianism, but I'm also opposed to secular messianism. And some people on the far left have a belief that, if we just kiss the Palestinians and make up, we can have peace tomorrow. I don't think Yair Golan is there. I think he has a more reasoned approach. But there are definitely secular messianists who are just as dangerous as the religious ones.
All right, Mark Regev, Yoni Ben Menachem, and Yair Golan.